I told you last week about my brother-in-law, the farmer. Well, my nephew's a farmer too. He's got a little 10-acre plot up there in Heritage Valley, and he raises crops, and he's got horses and chickens and everything. And one day he was standing out there by the fence, and this bright pink Tesla just comes screaming up, stops right there by the fence, and this woman jumps out in her designer clothes and spiky high heels and hat and everything, and she comes running up to the fence and my nephew, and she says, "Oh my goodness, this is so exciting. I've never seen a real farm before, and real farm animals. Tell me, why does that cow over there not have any horns?" Well, my nephew was very polite, and he explained to her that, some breeds of cattle just don't have horns. And other cows, well, a vet will painlessly remove the horns to make the cows easier to manage. But he looked at the woman, and he said, "Now, the reason that cow you pointed to doesn't have any horns is it's a horse." You just can't get enough good farm jokes nowadays. Yeah.
I think the same guy was sitting on his porch. She came up with the Tesla. There's this huge mud puddle.
Yeah.
And so she also asked, was it safe for her to drive through it? And he said, "Sure." She started through, car sunk all the way to the doors. And she said, "I thought you said it was safe to go through." And he said, "Well, it only came up this high on my ducks."
There you go. Just a word of Christian counsel. I am the only one that tells jokes in this class.
But I tell better ones.
You do, but I intentionally tell poor jokes. One, because Johnny Carson got the most laughs when his jokes fell flat. And number two, it lowers your expectation for me for the rest of the class. So this is highly crafted. But thank you, Don, for that wonderful joke. All right, today we're going to say what we believe the human condition. So today is all about us. We've talked about God and the Bible and Jesus, and today we're going to talk about us, mankind, humans. And before we get started, I just want to say a word about that. When we studied about God, I said that it's important that we don't view God as this stern, mean old guy up there telling us to get off his lawn and we better mind our business or he's going to punish us, but that we understand God as he is presented in the Bible. A beautiful, eternally perfect God who desires to be in relationship with us, who redeemed us from our sin against him, who desires to bless us and welcome us into his kingdom. I wanted our view of God to be of just that he's beautiful and perfect and holy and loves us. Well, the same thing with mankind. There's a thing about humans that especially, and Christians are bad about this, that somehow we like to downgrade human beings. Now, I'll tell you where I think that came from, and our goal today is that we get a biblical view of mankind, not kind of what might be a current view. You see, back in the day, the Bible tells us in the Old Testament and the New Testament that God really values human beings, that he made us in his own image. The Psalms talk about how, and this is after the fall, by the way, right? Adam had already, messed up, and Eve chowed down on the apple, and they got kicked out. But even after that, in the Psalms, the psalmist writes about how God loves us and cares for us. It says he gives us wine to gladden our hearts. He gives us oil to make our faces shine. He gives us bread to sustain us. God desires to be in relationship with us. He desires to care for us. He desires that we worship him for his greatness and goodness. And the Semitic idea, the Jewish idea, was that the human body and the human soul was just this wonderful creation of God, and it was part of the interacting relationship with God. Now, by a couple of hundred years after Jesus, Christianity sort of reached a tipping point. You see, early on, the first Christians were all Jews. In fact, the Romans thought that Christianity was just a variation of Judaism. And then as you got more and more Gentile converts to Christianity, the church became 50-50. And then it became dominantly Gentile and not so much Jew. And the problem was all these Gentiles had grown up with Greco-Roman philosophy and stories and understandings. And some of the Jewishness of Christianity, that Semitic root of Christianity, was obscure to them. So the teachers at the time thought that they would explain some of the concepts of Christianity, particularly those, the idea of sacrifice and Messiah and whatnot, that they would use terms from the current philosophy of the day, what the Greeks understood, what the Romans understood. Now that makes sense. You know, you can't tell a person in the desert that our faith is an anchor because they don't know what an anchor is because there are no ships in the desert. So I understand you have to explain it in the terms of the culture. But the problem is those philosophical views of the Greeks and the Romans became dominant. And one of the worst things that happened is we got this idea that man was two parts, a flesh, a human part, and a spirit and a soul part. And that because of what we know, that human part, the flesh, was terrible. And it was bad, and it was evil and sinful, and we needed to purge that part, and we needed to build up that soul and spirit part. So this idea now that man has this terrible part of him that has to be purged. And I mean, I have to tell you, you know, if you read church history, after Christianity became the state religion, right, under Constantine, you couldn't get yourself killed for being a Christian anymore. And a lot of people were upset by that. Because, you know, you just want to go out as a martyr because that meant you were super spiritual. And so because you couldn't get yourself killed, you had to go out and beat yourself up because nobody would kill you. So these guys went out into the desert in a cave and they treated themselves terribly. All that wine and oil and bread that the Psalms tell us God gives man to gladden him and sustain him, these guys just didn't want any part of it. You know, they wanted to roll around the dirt and hit themselves with rocks, and because that was spiritual, because the body's bad, but the soul is good. And so this evolves over thousands of years. We get to nowadays, people think that a spiritual person is not a physical person, really. The people that are too physical may not be as spiritual, you know, that's the important thing. Well, it starts to get into the idea that because of that, human beings are just terrible. And by the skin of our teeth and the love of God is the only reason we ever get into heaven. But that's not what the Bible teaches. So hopefully by the end of our class today, we'll have a more accurate opinion of who we are, and we'll be able to see what the biblical text says. Okay, let me read our statement of faith here. We believe that God created Adam and Eve in his image, but they sinned when tempted by Satan. In union with Adam, human beings are sinners by nature and by choice, alienated from God and under his wrath. Only through God's saving work in Jesus Christ can we be rescued, reconciled, and renewed. So what we believe says two things about humans. We're wonderfully made in the image of God, but we've got this sin problem, okay? And that's what the Bible teaches. Man is wonderfully made, but we've got this ugly sin nature that breaks that original beauty. So I think the place to start then, when we look at all of us as human beings, is to start with that creation by God. Genesis 1, verse 27, so God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. Now, you can go on later, and there's the whole story about how women came along. Adam clearly was in the garden. He didn't have anybody to cook or do his laundry. So you know, God had to make women. Only the guys are laughing at this point, let it be noted. So anyway, we need to look at this statement in Genesis 1:27 and kind of pick it apart. And I think there are four key things that we find from the Genesis account of making man. Number one, we are made directly by God. God made mankind. He didn't need to make man. Well, God didn't need to make any of creation. But he'd made this whole creation, trees and oceans and mountains, and then he made birds and fish and cows without horns. And I mean, he just made this amazing creation. And then when he was done with that, he went, you know what? I'm going to make me some people. So we are created directly by God. That's so important to remember that. We are the direct creation of the hand of God. The second thing is, it's not just that he made us like he made beautiful birds or, cute little kittens, but he made us in his image. We are not only directly made by God, but we are the image bearers of God. I mean, that's an amazing thing. You look at just in this church alone, we've got a couple hundred people here. You look at the beauty and diversity of this church. You look at the personalities and the talents and the skills and the wonderful people in this church. All that beautiful diversity is reflecting the image of God. And it's not that we walk around and say, hey, look at me, I look like God. God said, I want you to look like me. Okay, God created us directly, and he created us in his image. That's hugely important. The next thing is that we find out, and this nowadays is a controversial statement. We find out that humans are made in two flavors, male and female. And the Bible gives us a reason for that. In Genesis, God had made man. And he said, go ahead and name everything out there. Go ahead and see how you're doing. And at some point, God realized, no matter how cute the little fuzzy kittens are, no matter how great work that a horse can do for you, it's not a companion suitable for man. And God makes the wonderful statement in Genesis, it's bad for man to be alone. It's bad. We're not made to be individual lone rangers. We're made to be in relationship. And so what God does is he doesn't make something different. He makes something similar and completely compatible. It's as pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. There in the garden before the fall, men and women were this beautiful, perfect, equal, complementary a matchup. And that's how God made it. He made it perfect. So God decided that we shouldn't be alone, that we should have a partner. He designed us for relationship, and so he created for us the perfect matching partner, the complementary partner, okay? The last thing that God did is he said, okay, I've made you directly, made you in my image. I've created this beautiful partnership between male and female. And now our job, God has given us a job. God says, go out and multiply, and I want you to serve me by good stewardship of the creation. God values us so much that he said it's our job to be stewards of that amazing creation that he made. All those trees and mountains and rivers and birds and fish and whatever there is, God said, you guys, you go out and be stewards of that. I want you to be the one that manages my creation for me. And through that, we give great glory to God. So if we look at the biblical account of how humans came to be, we're amazing. Not just because we think so, but because God made us that way. Now, part of what I try to do in this class is tell us why any of this matters. This matters more than anything I can think of because we are God's image bearers, because each of us is the direct creation of God, because we share worship of him and his desire that we would be stewards of creation, we value all human life because of that. We value all human life at all stages, from conception to death. We don't practice violence against each other. We don't practice harsh imprisonment and injustice against each other, because God has made each of us to be in his image. God has made each of us to be his special creation, and therefore we recognize that, and we share that same love and recognition of God's image by being respectful of all stages of human existence. There is no bit of human existence that doesn't deserve honor and glory as the creation of God, from conception to the very final breath. Now, God has made us with all this, and consequently, God values us as the pinnacle of his creation. In Psalm 8, it says, "You have made them, humans, all of us, a little lower than the angels, and crowned them with glory and honor. You made them rulers over the work of your hands. You put everything under their feet, all flocks and herds and animals of the wild, the birds of the sky and the fish in the sea, all that swim the paths of the seas." God has given us a value that is greater than all of creation. This is so important. We can't look at ourselves and think somehow, we'll get to sin in a moment, but as we're created by God, as we're gifted by God, as we bear his image, as he's asked us to be stewards of his incredible creation, we can't see anything but honor and goodness in that. That is who we are as created by God. The second thing, how God values humanity so much, is that Jesus, and I said this when I talked about Jesus last week, Jesus retains human form for all eternity. Think about that for a minute. God, the eternal God, the supreme being, the perfect Holy One, his Son, who is also divinely God, has chosen to retain our form, human form, not just for a couple of days, but for all eternity. Jesus rose from the dead in a resurrected human body. Jesus is reigning in heaven in a resurrected human body. Jesus will return to us in his resurrected human body, and he will bring all of us back alive with our resurrected human bodies. God values humankind so much that God will retain for all eternity human form, right? How can you not see the value that we have from how God has made us and given us our job to serve him, and has even taken our image for all eternity? That's the really good stuff about humans. All right, here's the ugly stuff. You knew there was another side of the coin. The bad thing is, with all that goodness going on, man managed to mess it up. And after God created man and gave him the most perfect place ever to live, and all the food he could want, and this wonderful job as steward of creation, and a beautiful companion, right? Man went, nah, not so much. I think I want to do my own thing. And so mankind sinned against God. And you can read the passages in Genesis if you wish, but the important thing to remember is that it's not just Adam and Eve, it's universal. Paul tells us in Romans that all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. When Adam sinned, it broke everything. It doesn't take away the amazing beauty that we have as image bearers of God. It doesn't take away our responsibility as his stewards. It doesn't take away the fact that God chose to be in human form eternally. But it does, it puts a fly in the ointment, you know? There's a freckle on that soft white tummy of humankind, and that's sin. And now we have to deal with that, because now we have two things in operation. We have the amazingness of mankind as God's creation, and we have the evil of mankind through sin. When Adam sinned, a couple of things happened. First, and the worst of it, is we became alienated from God. God is perfect. God is holy. God is perfectly holy. We have sinned. We can't be in the presence of a perfectly holy God. We have been alienated from God. Doesn't mean he doesn't want anything to do with us. God has pursued humans since the day Adam got thrown out of the park, okay? But we are alienated from God. We no longer have the unity we had in the garden. The second thing that happened to us is we lost our innocence. Now, in the narrative in Genesis, suddenly after Adam and Eve sin, they went, uh-oh, we're naked. And they had to run and put on fig leaves, right? Why was that? Well, in the Bible, that nakedness was a sign of our innocence. And that innocence was lost at the point of sin, right? Suddenly, mankind has lost the innocence of the perfect creation. We now know that there's sin and there's evil, and we can see that it's different than good. The next thing that happened, and this affects all of us, is death entered the world. Romans again, Paul says, therefore, just as through one man sin entered the world, and death through sin, so death spread to all mankind because all have sinned. When Adam sinned, his sin now marks all of us. The technical theology term, if you want to impress people with your theological vocabulary, we have imputed sin. God said Adam sinned, and Adam is the head of all humans, the very first one. So all of us who are humans following after Adam, we all bear that mark. So as humans, death entered the world, the sin of Adam entered the world, and it results in death. There's another type of sin besides that sin that we get from Adam, and that's our favorite. That's personal sin, right? That's the stuff we just enjoy trying to get away with, right? And we're all different on that one, right? Everybody has their own favorite sins. Well, maybe not you guys. I have a whole list of them that I just love, and God has to smack me to tell me to knock it off. So not only do we as humans bear Adam's sin, but we have this nasty little sin nature that just loves to go around and sin. And sin is, as evil and terrible as sin is, when we think of it, it's something we really like. I mean, think about it. I don't like torturing babies. I think that's terrible. I never torture babies. Boy, I sure do like being angry at people, though. That kind of makes me, when I'm driving, and I'm just so angry at the guy that's going too slow, and I'm kind of using inappropriate language in the car, I feel good. Well, that's a sin, right? But it's a sin I do because I like it, right? You think about the sins you commit, there's sins that are easy for you to, I don't rob out of store gas stations because I don't like that. But, I might cheat a little bit here and there as I'm, going through my tax preparation or something. You see, we all pick sins that are easy for us. And the evil one doesn't even have to force us because he knows our sin nature, we run rampant with personal sin. So death is the result of sin, and we all have Adam's sin as well as our own personal sin. The next thing that happened when Adam sinned was that perfect balance between man and the creation ended. And man now has to work really hard to survive in a broken creation. When Adam and Eve were running around the garden, they could just go pick fruit. They could just pick whatever they wanted to eat. I don't know if you guys have ever tried to grow a tomato plant on your balcony or in your backyard. It's hard. Even a dumb little tomato plant, you got to dig up the ground, you got to put in fertilizer, you got to go out and water it, you got to make sure bugs don't get on it, and then you got to wait like 3 months, and then you get, for your $10 investment, you get 2 20-cent tomatoes, And we have to work hard to survive. And that's the product of Adam's sin, is that we have to struggle to survive in a broken creation. Now, the last thing that happened with Adam's sin is relationships were broken. In the garden, Adam and Eve had the most perfect relationship ever, even better than me and my wife. And I like to, I think we have the most perfect. She might differ on that, but Adam and Eve had a perfect relationship. And suddenly with sin, that relationship was broken. Years ago, here at this church, I had a young gal who was engaged to be married. She came up and asked me after I got done teaching a Sunday school class, she said, I was reading this passage in Genesis, and it really bothered me. Can you help? Okay, what's going on? She said, I'm reading this passage, and in my Bible, my translation, it says that one of the curses of the fall is that I'll desire my husband. And she said, that really bothers me. I mean, one of the reasons I'm going to marry this guy is I desire him. I think he's handsome. I desire him emotionally. I desire him physically. I want to spend my life with this man. How can I be cursed to desire him? And that makes sense. I mean, you gals know you desire your husbands, right? I mean, when I'm sitting at home in old worn out shorts and a wife beater, chowing down on a bag of Doritos, Libby walks in the room and goes, man, I desire this guy, right? This idea that desiring your partner is somehow a curse. And I thought, that can't be true. So I told her, as any good teacher does, let me pray over that. And then I went home and studied really hard so I could give her an answer. And what the text says there is that part of the fall is that women will desire to impose their will on their husbands. But the husbands will be stronger and they will dominate the wife. That's the picture of a broken relationship. Two individuals desiring their own will, regardless of what the other one wants. The wife wants her will, and the husband says, no, it's my way. And that's what happened to relationships at the fall. They became broken. Not just husband and wife. Personal relationships can be broken too. I can't believe you didn't send me a card on my birthday. How dare you? I'm never talking to you again. Right? I mean, we get all this stuff in there. Okay, here's a spoiler alert in case you haven't gotten up to the New Testament yet. God remedies that. Paul in Ephesians talks about how God has redeemed relationships. After the redemption of the cross, relationships now, for us as believers in Jesus, are all about mutual submission, using our abilities in our relationship to look out for the best of our partner, and our partner looking out for the best for us. And so it's mutually compatible, mutual submission. So God has repaired these broken relationships, but at the fall, relationships are broken. And if you look at, just look at the society today. You look at relationships that are in trouble, and most of the root is that one person wants to dominate and the other person just won't go along with it. So part of the fall is that relationships began to be broken. So why does it matter? Although creation and man both bear the handiwork and the image of God, we reflect the brokenness of sin, and death is a reality of life, right? You know, the beautiful seasons, I like fall. Fall's big in my house. Everybody in my house loves fall. My goodness, my daughter-in-law, Bridget, sweet girl, she'd start fall in around February if she could. But think about what fall is. Fall is nature dying, right? All that beautiful stuff that popped up in spring, those pretty flowers and all those wonderful leafy trees. In fall, everything dies. It dies beautifully. Colors are great, but it dies. Life is a cycle of death. And that's because of sin. That's because of the brokenness. So what happens then for us, as I said, is that we inherit Adam's sin. It's given to us because we are all coming down from Adam. And then we also have our own personal sin nature. So here's our biblical view of man. Mankind is beautiful, the creation of God. But mankind also has this ugly sin nature because of the sin of Adam. And so mankind is kind of an interesting thing. Now, most of the time when we get off track about humans, we put too much emphasis on one of those two things. We put a whole lot of evidence on how amazing we are, and we forget about that nasty sin stuff. Or we spend all our time saying, oh man, we're just sinful jerks. And we forget how beautifully made we are. Man is a balance of the two. The Bible shows that man is the balance of two. Okay, the next few minutes are I don't think they should be controversial, but it might be. So I don't want to offend anyone here in the room. I don't want to offend anyone at home on Zoom or someone who's watching this on the internet 15 years from now. But yeah, the internet will still be here in 15 years, I think. There's a standard question that Christian people that do apologetics, people that do evangelism, there's a question that they ask, and they do this to elicit a particular response. And it goes something like this. They'll walk up to somebody that they want to share the gospel with that they don't think is a believer. And they'll say, tell me, do you think man is basically good? Now, in their mind, they're already expecting the response, right? Because, you know, you go down to the mall and you say, hey, can I have your attention? Is man basically good? And everybody's going to say, yeah, we're pretty good. And the person asking that question knows that you're going to say that. And they're going to say, aha, man is not good, he's bad, and that's why he needs a Savior, and that Savior is Jesus Christ. You know, I don't like that question, because the question's just not right. The question is man basically good. It doesn't work. It's not biblical. If you walk up to me and say, John, your beautiful little 2-year-old granddaughter in that fluffy little princess dress, is she basically good? I'll say, yeah, she's amazing. She's the most beautiful child ever. She's fantastic. She's brilliant. I love her. And you go, no, she's bad. She's a sinner. I may bop you in the nose for that, because my beautiful little granddaughter is perfect. And I'm wrapped around her tiny little 2-year-old finger. You see, you can't ask people, are you bad? Because in general, people don't see themselves as bad. But here's what the biblical picture of man is. Man is basically good with the capacity to do great evil. You see, that's the biblical answer to the question. If somebody says, is man basically good? You say, yes, but man has the capacity to do tremendous evil. You see, if you just watch the news one evening, right? My wife calls it the police blotter news, because the first 10, 15 minutes of the news, before they get to weather and entertainment and all the other stuff, is a list of, there was 3 people shot tonight in South Central, and there were 4 people died in a wrong-way car crash on the freeway. 187 people have died of COVID. 2 more people were stabbed at a kid's birthday. So you get this list of all these terrible things, violence and death. And for anybody to say, no, we're all great, ignores that every day terrible violence and injustice and death takes place all over the world. But you can't look at that and say, well, that's why humans aren't any good. No, because you have to acknowledge that humans are made in the image of God. And he values us, greatly values us, even after we sin. God wants to give us wine to gladden our hearts and oil to make our face shine and bread to... God desires to bless us and be in relationship with us. But we have this ugly sin nature that gets in the way. Now that's where you get to do the gospel. See, that's where you say, you know what? Man is beautiful. And he's amazing because mankind is made by God. But man is broken. He's got this terrible capacity for sin and evil. And the only solution to that is the message of the gospel. You can't tell people they're bad and expect them to go along with your program. That's not how people are wired. So the biblical view is that we're amazing, we're beautiful, we're valued by God, but we have this ugly sin nature that makes us capable of tremendous evil. Not just to others, but to ourselves. People can be terrible to themselves. Okay. This last section, what others believe, was kind of hard to do. And I'll tell you, I kind of went back and forth on this. I taught a class very similar to this, I guess, 12 years ago at this church. And at that time, when I got to this portion of human beings, I decided that I was going to say, here's all the other views of human beings. And I decided to go through the list of world religions and secular philosophies. And I said, if you're Hindu, you believe this about man. And if you're a Buddhist, you believe this about man. And if you're Zoroastrian, I don't think there are any left, but if you are, this is what you view a man. And if you're a secular humanist, this is what you know, and as I'm getting ready for this class, I thought, that's just not a good way to do it. I'm pretty familiar with other world religions. I'm pretty familiar with Hinduism and the Vedic religions. I'm really familiar with Buddhism. And I can tell you within these world religions, there's huge diversity and difference of thought. You can't just say all people that follow the Vedic tradition are all A, B, and C, because they're not. You can't walk up to a Buddhist and say, all of you Buddhists are the same. They may have a commonality that they all follow the Four Noble Truths and they all try to follow the Eightfold Path, but outside of that, it's very different. You can't walk up to, a professor of secular humanity, if such a thing exists at a college, and expect him to agree with the guy across the hall in sociology. Okay, so there's too much diversity. So I thought, well, how do I tell you what others believe about man? And so I've kind of made this amalgam of three basic ideas. And some of it reflects Eastern philosophy, some of it reflects secular philosophy. So, but kind of all the other views fall into one of these three. The first one is that a human person's basic being, that thing that makes us us, it's not our body and it's not our mind. But we are at our core part of this big cosmos. And what happens is we try really hard to get rid of all this stuff that we're bound to with our physical bodies and get that inner core to go back and become back part of that giant cosmos. As if there's a little hole that our little inner being then pops up and fills. Another view, again very similar, is that there's no eternal, unchanging self for us. There's no soul. In fact, our physical bodies are just an illusion of our mind. It's a summation of the parts. And that our goal is to not become part of something big, but to just be released back into the void. Right? I just did Johnny Ace Palmer magic hands there, like that. I'm like Doug Henning today. You can Google Doug Hanning, anybody who's under the age of 30. The idea is that we just go back into the void. We go back into nothingness. All those things that we think are us don't exist. So one view is that really none of this matters. It's just immaterial. We need to get pat to our little bit of the cosmos. Like Carl Sagan, who I like Carl Sagan. The guy was great. And he always said, we're part of the cosmic soup. We're made of star stuff. We need to get back to that. The other view is we just need to get to nothingness. There's nothingness. Our goal is to get there. And the final view is sort of from the cosmic view down to just simply we're the sum of our parts. That all of us are just merely the sum of our parts. The little synapses of our brains and how our nervous systems are made and how our muscles and our bones on an individual basis. Anything that you see that's me is only here because all of this is working. That the minute this stops working, I'm nothing but that star stuff that Sagan talked about. I'm nothing but a bunch of little carbon atoms that are going to just release back into the dirt and, I don't know, reform to become a tree or a bird. Okay? That all of this is just simply random chance. That all of this, all this stuff that we say, wow, I love this person, they're so wonderful, I want to spend, that's just an illusion. What you're loving is their operating synapses and biological systems. And that when they go and when you go, that's it. You go back. God, if they talk about God at all, they go, hey, God formed you out of the dirt and that's what you end up becoming. Now you can see how all three of these different views differ from the biblical view of humans. The biblical view of human says that we are both a body and a soul. We are created directly by God in his image. We are highly valued by God, but we got this little sin problem going on as well. That's the biblical view. Man is good and sinful. Man is a body and a soul. Man is the direct creation of God, not just random linking of carbon molecules into something that walks and talks and likes to eat pizza, right? The biblical view of man is this tremendous creation of God with this sin problem. Next week, we're going to talk about how that sin problem is remedied. Next week, we're going to talk about the work of Christ and talk about how God has dealt with our little sin issue that we all have as humans. Any questions? Snappy answers? Then Mazel tov. Go enjoy your day. I'll see you next week.
If you enjoyed today's lesson, if you were blessed by it, if you found it helpful, please make sure to click like and subscribe on the YouTube page. And if you have any questions at all, you can add it to the comments, or you can go ahead and email us here at beachbiblechurch.org. Thanks for watching.